Hello, and welcome to I Hate That Book, the podcast where a woman in her rage era unapologetically rants about the book she can't escape. On today's episode, we're talking about the American classic, The Great Gatsby by F Scott Fitzgerald. Obviously, before I begin, spoiler alert, although I'm assuming that most people in America, at least, have read this book and know what happens, either if it was 20, 40, 50, 60 years ago. I started this podcast because I read a lot of books, and just so many of them, especially these mega bestsellers, just piss me off. They're so bad, and I don't understand why they're being published, why they're bestsellers, so I have to complain about it. But I understand also, writing a book is hard, and other people do like some of these books, so I really try to understand what it is that people liked or disliked and why stories I thought worked or didn't work, and sort of an analytical lens to it and not just hating on things, although hating on things is fun. So here we go. The Great Gatsby was first published April 10th, 1925 by Charles Scribner and Sons. It received fairly positive reviews on its first publication, but it was a commercial flop and only sold about a third of the amount of copies that Fitzgerald expected it to. He even said that people were misunderstanding and that the story was never supposed to be realistic, and he resented that the critics didn't see the parallels between Gatsby and himself. During World War II, they, the U.S. Wartime Council on whatever, I know, very good research on my part. They issued lots of paperback copies of classic books to the troops stationed overseas, and The Great Gatsby was one of them. And it was at this point in time that it started to become hugely popular and has since entered the American canon of great works and has been taught in high schools across America for the last, 70 years. So I'm not saying that the latent homoerotic undertones appealed to hundreds of thousands of men in nearly all male environments on military bases, and that's why it's popular, but I'm also not saying that, and we'll get into that when we talk about it. So today, on Goodreads, it has about 5.7 million ratings, an average of 3.93 stars. This is the little blurb. The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald's third book, stands as the supreme achievement of his career. First published in 1925, this quintessential novel of the Jazz Age has been acclaimed by generations of readers. The story of the mysteriously wealthy J. Gatsby and his love for the beautiful Daisy Buchanan, of lavish parties on Long Island at a time when the New York Times noted gin was the national drink and sex was the national obsession. It is an exquisitely crafted tale of America in the 1920s. So that's the blurb. Since then, we've had several plays, television shows, musicals, and movies. The one that I guess most people today would think of would be the 2013 adaptation directed by the director Baz Luhrmann, starring Leonardo DiCaprio as Gatsby, Tobey Maguire as Nick Carraway, and Carey Mulligan as Daisy Buchanan. It currently has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 48% from the audience and 67% from the critics, unless I mix those up. I would highly doubt that the audience liked it more than the critics. I don't know. Okay, so as always, I'm going to talk about first I'm going to talk about the writing, because this is a great work of literature, so we have to talk about the writing of it. And then, as always, I will talk about the characters, the plot, the world and the themes more in this one. Then I will read some 1-star reviews from Goodreads and end with my overall thoughts about the book. In a sentence, though, I would say before I begin, The Great Gatsby is awful rich people being awful to each other, and then someone gets hit by a car, the end. Okay, so first for the writing. I acknowledge that F. Scott Fitzgerald has a very, very good economy of words and quite often has very beautiful, evocative descriptions. But I also find that he has a tendency towards abstraction that leaves you kind of like, what does that mean? And a tendency towards unclarity. I've heard that some people don't even realize when when Myrtle gets hit by the car, they don't even realize that that's what happened. I think he has this tendency to describe around a thing instead of a thing, which can lead towards confusion. But I understand that the very poeticalness of the language is one of the appeals. I guess if that's your thing, then sure. If the beauty of the prose is all what you're about, I guess there's some nice sentences in here, I guess. So let's talk about the characters. Nick Carraway. He is the narrator. Is he the main character? It's very unclear. He is just sort of he's just a potato. Like, he has very little personality. He just sits there and is like, oh my God, Gatsby's so amazing. I'm still trying to understand why the book is through his eyes, and I've heard some people say it's because he's the one who has character growth. And I say, does he though? This whole thing is this memory that he's writing down later, and so he should be reflecting and thinking, oh, I was stupid then, or blah, 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 or I've grown since then, or whatever. And it just kills me. So he has this line about midway through the book where he says, I am one of the few honest people that I have ever known. And I'm just like, boo, you are not. You have been lying to yourself this whole time, to us, to other people. And in the novel, you lie all the time. And even if you're not just telling lies, he lies by omission all the time. Is it a lie of omission a thing, or is that a sin of omission? I don't know. But like, think about how he helps Daisy cheat on her husband. That's a lie, Nick. Maybe you could say that at the end he's disillusioned with the money and all that, and the American dream and all that stuff. But I don't think so. I think he's more just upset that the man he loved died. Here's my theory about why it's told from Nick's point of view, is so that we can have someone just adore Gatsby from the outside in a way that if it's from Gatsby's POV or even a third person narrator, we can't have it. And you know why? Is because Gatsby is Fitzgerald's idealized representation of himself. So he just wants someone to fawn all over himself. That's why this is written this way. That's my theory. Before I continue talking about the next, I just also have to say, I noticed something about Nick when I was reading this that I was like, oh my God, I did not remember this from reading it when I was 15 in high school. And that is, oh my God, Nick is so gay. And you're thinking, oh yeah, well, of course, he's in love with Gatsby. And I'm like, no, it's way more than that. Yes, I think he is in love with Gatsby, but I'm going to read you some examples just in case you don't believe me. So here we are on page 7. This is 2 chapters before we even meet Gatsby, and we're talking about his cousin or friend, Tom. I can't remember, Tom. He meets Daisy, and he's like, oh, she has a nice voice. And then he meets Jordan, and he's like, oh, she's athletic. And here we meet Tom. He was a sturdy, straw-haired man of 30 with a rather hard mouth and supercilious manner. 2 shining, arrogant eyes had established dominance over his face and gave him the appearance of always leaning aggressively forward. Not even the effeminate swank of his riding clothes could hide the enormous power of that body. He seemed to feel those glistening boots until he strained to the top lacing. You could see a great pack of muscle shifting when his shoulder moved under his thin coat. It was a body capable of enormous leverage. A cruel body. And someone pointed out to me that this sounds almost like Sarah J. Maas or someone describing Rhysand. I would not have noted this passage if it hadn't been for the friend, and I know you're listening, friend, and I'm not going to name you or anything, but who did talk about how attractive Jonathan Bailey's calves look in the movie Wicked. And otherwise, I would not have been like, oh yeah, this is... Yes. So then we have, here we go, him describing him describing a woman who is very sensuous and curvy as in her middle 30s and faintly stout, but she carried her surplus flesh sensuously as some women can. Her face contained no facet or gleam of beauty. So that's him describing Tom's mistress, who Tom clearly thinks is a bombshell. So then here we have the real kicker. Okay, so he goes to a party with Tom and his mistress, right? And he leaves with this other guy. And so they both get into the elevator, and here I'm going to read it to you. Come to lunch someday, he suggested as we groaned down in the elevator. Where? Anywhere. Keep your hands off the lever, snapped the elevator boy. I beg your pardon, said Mr. McKee with dignity. I didn't know I was touching it. All right, I agreed. I'll be glad to. ... The ... is in the narrative. Like, this is just continuous. I was standing beside his bed and he was sitting up between the sheets, clad in his underwear with a great portfolio in his hands. If that was not a gay tryst, I don't know what it was. If that's something else, please explain it to me. I don't know how else that can be explained. What else brings 2 men into a bedroom in the sheets in their underpants? Okay. So then he does have some thoughts about Gatsby that it's like, that's not a straight thought, Nick. So we have that anyone should care in this heat, whose flushed lips he kissed, whose head made damp the pajama pocket over his heart. Not a straight thought, Nick. He also has a thought about like Jordan, his girlfriend. And he's like, oh yeah, like she's so attractive. She has a sweat mustache on her upper lip. And you're like, now I'm not a straight man, obviously, but I don't know that there's ever been a straight man in the history of the world who's been like, oh yes, that woman is so attractive. She has a sweat mustache. I rest my case. I don't know what it signifies or means that Nick has all these homoerotic undertones, as I implied earlier. I was like, maybe this is why this book got so popular. I don't know what it means that he has all these homoerotic undertones, unless it's, maybe it's semi-autobiographical, sort of, or there's some, like, he's lying to himself, like, he is self-delusional in a lot of ways that you see throughout the narrative, and still even as he's reflecting on this, and this is just yet another part of his identity. I'm not exactly sure what it means, but I feel like this is pretty undeniable, and I just picked a few really key examples, and I was like, oh my god, I cannot believe, I guess we were all just like, oh my gosh, the green light, because that's obvious and very clear, and a lot of Gatsby is like, what, it just happened? So I guess some of these things, it's like, yeah, if you're, you can just skip over it. You're like, what just happened? Don't worry about it. What else is there to say about Nick other than that he is a complete patsy who blames the people around him for his problems and was totally suckered in by all of them and is the problem in his life and just blames other people. He's awful. I can't stand him. So that's Nick, our narrator. Gatsby himself, I'm astounded that this is how Fitzgerald sees himself, or even if he's like an idealized version of Fitzgerald, that's really quite the chutzpah. Wow. To write yourself as this. I can't stand Gatsby. He's fake, old sport, He's delusional. I guess in some ways he's kind of like, oh, he's a dreamer and he's a romantic. And, so I guess all these themes about, dreams and ideals and reality and how you deal with that. I don't know. I just find him to be this fake, phony criminal who is just obsessed with this woman that he knew. It's like stalkery, kind of like being obsessed with this woman for so long. Just let her go. So with Daisy Buchanan, I think she's like Nick's second cousin or whatever, who is Zelda Fitzgerald, which is really disturbing when you think about it, that this is how he writes his wife. I am torn between seeing her as this dumb, vapid socialite who neglects her own child and cheats on her husband and is just a piece of human garbage, and a woman caught between these two really powerful men in a time when women couldn't even get their own credit cards and had just won the right to vote like 2 years earlier, raised in Southern Belle society. She has that line about how she wants her daughter to be a beautiful little fool, and I sometimes wonder how self-aware that line is. But regardless of the fact that, she is trapped in this position, blah, 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 she is still the worst and literally murdered a woman and didn't care. She's just thoughtless, cruel, and vapid and awful. Her husband, Tom, who I read that very striking description of earlier, is even worse. There's this double standard about him cheating on his wife, and that's fine, but once she cheats on him, it's like, how dare you? He's also just so racist and disgusting and chauvinist. He's horrible. As you can see, there's a pattern of this is just the worst people in the world being awful to each other. We have Jordan, who I guess she's not that objectionable. She's kind of an enabler, hanger on, but whatever. She's the golf player, that Nick dates. Tom's mistress, Myrtle Wilson, R.I.P. Myrtle, and Mr. Wilson, who is also there for a plot point for what exists of the plot in this book, which I will get to now. Is there a plot? Again, as with so many, there's nothing pulling you through this book except maybe morbid curiosity about these horrible rich people. Did you know Gatsby doesn't even come in until like 30% of the way through the book? Here, let me summarize what happens in this book to you. You meet Nick, he gets a house. You go to an orgy with him, maybe not an orgy, a party, whatever. And then you go to Gatsby's party and you meet him. Nick helps Gatsby and Daisy meet up and have an affair. He maybe dates Jordan. Then that's like 100, 120, 150 pages. Then Tom finds out about the affair, gets all aggro. They go to town. And on the way back, Daisy hits Myrtle with her car accidentally, and kills her. Gatsby takes the blame and gets murdered for it by Mr. Wilson. And then the end, Nick is like, oh, I'm really sad. And no one came to Gatsby's funeral because they're all awful, that they don't care about this criminal, bootlegging, phony, weird, creepy guy who was my neighbor that I was obsessed with. How dare they? And then he moves back home. The end. Is it really about disillusionment? Wouldn't Nick have stayed if Gatsby had survived? Then it's not really about the money, is it? It's about your love for Gatsby, Nick. So that's the plot. And so, okay, Fitzgerald is like, oh, it's not supposed to be a realistic plot. And I'm like, okay, Fitzgerald, but it doesn't have a plot. All this stuff with the affair, like, it all happens in the last 20 pages of the book. It's It's just people going to parties. That's what happens. Just goes from one party to the next. And you're like, wow, I'm so glad that during Prohibition and the Jazz Age, you guys had all these raging parties. And yep, it's so great. That's all I have to say about the plot. I'm going to talk for a minute about like the world, which I'm going to include my discussion of themes. So it's a depiction of the Jazz Age. I guess it's good at that. Written during the time about something he knows really well. There's a lot of themes going on it. It's about the American dream, money, class, how it's all empty. Money destroys people. Attaining your dreams is actually the worst, but people will still go to horrible lengths to achieve them. It also has all of the isms: classism, racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, and to be honest, I'm not sure how many of them are examined. And part of me is like, okay, if a book is just racist, why is it great? I understand, things written in a different time, blah, blah, blah. So maybe we can forgive some of these sins because, it's a different time. Of course, they thought differently, had different, it's a historical artifact, but also maybe sometimes historical artifacts need to stay in the past. Some of these themes are, I think, examined in the novel, but some of them it's very unclear to me. So like racism, he puts racism in the mouth of Tom, and Tom is clearly the worst. So maybe you can say, okay, we're grossed out by Tom, grossed out by his ideas. So clearly, we're supposed to be grossed out by these racist ideas. Maybe. Classism, he is critiquing wealth and ostentatious, obnoxious displays of wealth and luxury. Okay. Sexism, okay, the narrator clearly, like Nick, does not like women very much. And I'm kind of like, I don't know how the women are treated by the narrative itself. I'm a little bit more iffy on that one. But the one that I'm like, no, this book actually is anti-Semitic. In a way that's just, no, this book is anti-Semitic. If we meet the character of Wolfsheim, I think is his name, the Jewish lawyer, I think he's a lawyer, who is literally just described by his enormous nose. I'm not going to read any of these passages because they're disgusting. Anti-Semitism is a rising problem in the world. It has never gone away. Even though there was a Holocaust, I don't really understand why. It is on the rise again in America and in Europe especially. In America, I read the statistic that 33% of Jewish people have been the personal target of anti-Semitism in the last year. Guys, why are we doing this? Reading books that are just anti-Semitic and giving them to teenagers and giving them this vocabulary of anti-Semitism, racism. Is this the best idea we've ever had, guys? Especially, I don't remember my teacher saying, hey guys, this is racist and bad, this depiction of this Jewish person, or this depiction of, this woman or whatever. I don't remember being taught that. And it's, I think, kind of really important to say, hey guys, this is, you read, especially to impressionable teenagers reading this book, okay, this is not good. So I guess that's a failure of the education system. And the symbolism, this book is all about the symbolism. And I just have to say, rereading it as an adult, I picked up on a lot of subtle things that I talked about, Nick being maybe homosexual, having homosexual impulses, whatever. The symbolism is so on the nose, just completely obvious. You're like, yeah, no, duh, the green light. Huh. Did you notice this time that the interior car, Gatsby's murder car, is also green? Yeah, no, the green light is the American dream. So for the reviews, here's our first 1-star review from Vanna, who says, after 6 years of heated and polarized debates, I'm deleting the reviews that sparked them. And I actually saw several reviews like this. So I just have to say, someone disagrees with you about liking a book, any book, that's okay. You can disagree with me and be like, no, the Great Gatsby is amazing and I loved it, and that's okay. I'm just saying why I didn't like it and what some of the flaws I see in it are. And we don't have to get personal or be mean. It's just our opinions. From Tim. I'm supposed to love this book. It's a classic. It's the great American novel. As an English major, I'm supposed to just worship every sentence of the book and praise its brilliance. I don't like it though. I really don't. In fact, I downright dislike this book. But Tim, it's a metaphor for the American dream, and I get it. Of course I get it. The symbolism is so blatant. How could I not get it? Unless, of course, Gatsby is actually a Green Lantern who is staring off into that distant green light as the symbolism for his secret identity. He is also defeated by something yellow, which is a weakness of all Green Lanterns. Maybe when he's off at parties, he's actually off saving the world with superpowers. Brilliant! 5 out of 5 stars. From Sologden, a waste of space, rich loser chases women, has champagne cocktails, dies. From Zeke, if I want to read about shiftless rich people and their drunken machinations, I'll read The Hollywood Reporter or TMZ. From Melanie, I think this is one of the most boring books I've ever read. I would honestly rather stab my eyeballs with a blunt pencil than lay my eyes on this book ever again, old sport. No hate to those who treasure this book, it's just absolutely not for me. I hated the characters, the prose, and the plot. The sparkling 5-star reviews absolutely baffle me, but how wonderful that we can all enjoy different things. Okay, so those are the reviews. And so now time for my overall hot take. Just because a book talks about something doesn't make it great. Just because it talks about the American dream, critiques the American dream, whatever, does not make this book inherently great. And likewise, just because a book doesn't talk about something also doesn't mean it can't be great. I also am like, okay, so this book is supposed to be a critique of the American dream, but does it really though? Because Fitzgerald clearly sees himself as Gatsby. Nick is in love with Gatsby and adores him. And from the very beginning of the book, he's like, no, Gatsby was way better than all of them and was perfect and wonderful. He says, only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. So how critical are we being, Nick? If you like gritty, dark books, if you like books about awful people and their awfulness to each other and their dysfunctional relationships, if you like books that are more about luxuriating in the prose and have nothing to pull you forward, and just about awful people being awful, then yeah, you might enjoy this. I am not one of those people, and I suspect that not many of us are. I understand part of this is taste, but seriously, why can we not have some sort of middle ground with like good writing that also has a plot? Why can the two not coexist? I don't really get why this book is so universally beloved and why it's in the curriculum for like all high schoolers in America. And if it does continue to be, then I would really like to see more awareness of some of the awfulness and the content, like racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, as content warnings before you read the book, because I got none of that in school, and I don't think I got any of it in the edition that I read. And given the state of the world today, I think that would be helpful before people open this book. So yeah, that is my hot take about The Great Gatsby. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of I Hated That Book, and we'll see you next week.